So we're going to start with Doris and Andrea and the elusive Wolverine. Doris Hausleitner is a wildlife biologist that specializes in rare and endangered species. She studied sweet creatures like western toads and screech owls before getting mixed up in the messy world of the Wolverine. Doris is based in Nelson, and she's an ecology instructor at Selkirk College, a Google farmer, and a mother in her other life. And Andrea Kortello is also in Nelson and is a professional biologist with 20 years of experience tracking large and medium-sized carnivores. She has been studying wolverines since 2012 and wishes she could travel in the mountains as quickly and effortlessly as they do. Andrea is excited to be collaborating with Doris and Miriam Barroetto out of Golden to find wolverine dens in the Columbia Basin. So welcome and take it away.
Great, thanks Nadine. I'm just gonna share my screen here. Thank you so much for coming to join us on this dark December night. We're so pleased to be here with you. So I want you to take a minute and just imagine that it's mid-winter, it's been snowing all week, and you're preparing for your backcountry ski trip tomorrow. So you're at home, it's in the evening, you're thinking about the route you're going to take, you're thinking about the avalanche conditions, you're looking at the weather forecast, and you're probably preparing your gear. Now it's the next day, you're out on the slopes, you're looking at the changing conditions, you're paying attention to weather, and you're also seeing if there's other people out, maybe going to poach your line or skiing above you. You're really aware, but one thing that you might not be aware of and paying attention to and putting in your planning is what other wildlife species are out there. So the wolverine, when it's route planning, it's thinking, where is my next food source? Will I be visiting my mate today? And do I have enough food to get my kits through the winter? So we want to talk to you today a little bit about wolverine reproductive biology. We want you to be able to leave this workshop being able to identify the wolverine by its tracks. And we want you to know what to do if you encounter wolverine tracks in winter. So why is this important? Wolverine are really incredible animals. They are huge travelers. One male wolverine will cover an area about 950 square kilometers. That's its home range. And sometimes they can travel over 100 kilometers in a single day over rough terrain. And because they travel such large distances, they require us to think about management at a landscape scale. And this makes them a real indicator of mountain ecosystem health. They also require a pretty consistent snowpack in order to travel, and they need spring snow cover because they den in snow. And so that makes them also quite sensitive to changes in climate. They are a species at risk. They're listed both federally and provincially, and they're culturally important to our Indigenous people in the region. Additionally, we like to think of them as important, and they really excite us and have this air of mystique about them. In 2012, Andrea and I started a wolverine project in the South Columbia Mountains. We recognized that there was a real lack of information. And so we did this genetic study, and it's kind of crazy to boil it down to one slide, but really that's what we're doing here. We found that in winter, we could predict where wolverine were by three major factors. One, they are in roadless areas or protected areas. Two, they require the spring snow cover. And three, they need a reliable food source. And we found that that reliable food source is the hoary marmot. And I put these little pink hearts on the Wolverine to indicate that the female models were even a stronger predictor for these variables. So at that stage in the game, when we finished this project, Andrea and I really had to think what we were going to do to promote Wolverine conservation. And so we decided to review our facts. So number one, we know that Wolverine den in winter. February 14th, which we all think of as Valentine's Day, I think of as the Wolverine birthday, because that's when the majority of Wolverine are born. They are in their dens from late January till mid-May. Wolverine have really low reproductive rates. The females don't start to reproduce until they're about 3 years of age, and then they only have 1 to 2 kits per year. They often skip a year, so if they don't have enough reserves, they just won't have any offspring. We also know from the literature that Wolverine return to the same denning areas. And it's interesting, if a female passes on, it'll be her offspring or her daughter that will return to that same area. And from our study, we can reiterate that we know that female Wolverine need roadless areas that have good food supply and snow right until May. So once we knew that, we decided to focus in on reproducing females as a way to conserve and have persistent populations. And we did this using 3 things. We used our habitat modeling and we used citizen science. And we had people call in where they'd seen Wolverine tracks. And it was amazingly successful. Following those calls and that habitat modeling, we would follow up with a drone and fly the area to see if there were a concentration of tracks, which would indicate a den. So there was this study that came out in Idaho in 2019 by Heinemeyer and her colleagues. And she showed that both male and female Wolverine will move out of the areas where there's recreation in their home range. And the interesting thing about this study was that Wolverine avoided both motorized and non-motorized recreation. She also found that the impact, though, is increased when there are more users, and if the user is unpredictable. So meaning instead of following the same skin track up or the same sled track, you're going off the road or off that predictable route. And finally, the use or the impact was greatest when users go the furthest. And so usually that means a motorized user. So female Wolverine are the most sensitive, and they're particularly sensitive at their den sites. And so we thought if we are able to protect these denning areas, and if we're able to get you to recognize what a denning area looks like, we could just avoid using those areas and then recreate in the entire rest of the mountains. These next few slides show a couple of typical areas where you might find a Wolverine den. The orange X is obviously the location of the den, and you can see it's a pretty rugged terrain. This is a north-facing slope at tree line. This one is at the toe of an avalanche slope, north-facing as well, at tree line, and it's a roadless drainage. And finally, this is in a boulder field, again in a cold-facing slope with no roads into the drainage and at the base of a boulder field. And you might recognize that these are all areas that you and I would also choose to recreate, mostly because it's north-facing and the snow is the best. I'm going to play for you this little video I took of Andrea in the summer when we visited one of these den sites, just to give you an idea of what the den looks like. You can see this is the largest boulder actually in the boulder field. It has multiple entrances so that the wolverine can come and go. And as you scan, you can see that we're right at tree line. This is a roadless drainage. And again, as we scan past the boulder, it'll show you that the terrain is quite rugged. But it's on the cold facing side of the slope. And actually the den itself is at the base of the slope. Even though the terrain is quite rugged, it's kind of quiet, and the slope is low there. So I'm going to turn it over to Andrea now, and she's going to tell you how to identify tracks and den sites.
Thanks, Doris. So Doris just showed you some of the slides of wolverine dens, and we've all seen this kind of terrain before. So how do you recognize if you're on top of a den? Well, timing and track concentrations. So wolverines have this huge home range, and they really only stick around in one area unless they've got a meal going, in which case they'll stick around for a couple days, or they're raising babies, in which case they'll stick around for a couple months. And that's the timing. Wolverine are usually in their dens raising their kits from mid-February to mid-May. So track concentrations. Well, we need to know what wolverine tracks looks like. And here's a wolverine track. So the way to tell wolverine tracks from anything else in the winter landscape is they have 5 toes. And the tracks are about the size of the palm of your hand. Any other tracks that big from a wolf or a cougar or lynx, they're gonna show 4 toes. So wolverine has 5 toes like a bear. But usually you can't see really nice clear tracks. Usually they're just blobs in the powder. And so the track pattern is what's really important. And this is showing the classic wolverine track pattern. It's a 3 pattern or a 4 pattern track on a diagonal with a space between sets of tracks. And this is classic. No other animal makes a track like this in the snow, and you can actually see these tracks often from quite far away. So the 3 pattern or 4 pattern track, that's sort of an easy lope. That's kind of their overdrive gear. If they need to accelerate or climb a hill, or if it's really deep powder, they'll drop down into 2nd gear. And this is 2nd gear. It's a 2x2 pattern. And it's accelerating. And so you can see in this slide, this animal is accelerating up to this summit ridge. This is Mount Field in the Canadian Rockies. And these are just such amazing animals. The animal just fired straight up the fall line to the ridge. And I can tell you, this was a lot of switchbacks on skis to get up to the same spot. This slide just demonstrates the transition from 2nd gear into 3rd gear. The animal's just come over a hill, crested a hill, and is now going downhill and transitioning from a 2x2 pattern to a 3x pattern. And the only animal that you might mistake this for is pine martens. They'll do a 2x pattern, but their tracks are quite a bit smaller, about the size of a toonie. So if they're big tracks and they're in this kind of pattern, that's a wolverine. So you'll end up seeing wolverine tracks in amazing places, like firing across a glacier or a ridge line. I have another slide that I'm not going to show in this talk where a wolverine is going across a ridge line and basically kicking off the cornice as it travels. They're really amazing places you see them. And if you see a single track like this, that's not an indication of a den. It's just an animal traveling through its home range and trying to find something to eat. Track concentrations are what we're looking for when we're looking for dens. So here's a little wolverine in the center the photo. And this is a concentration of tracks, obviously. You can see the little hole in the corner. And this is actually not a reproductive den. This is a food cache. And you can tell it's a food cache because there's all this bits of messy stuff like scat and gore and bits of bones sort of scattered around the front of it. Wolverine moms, when they have a den, they keep it very tidy. And the reason for this is because Wolverine kits are quite helpless and the mom has to leave them for extended periods of time. And so during that time, they're vulnerable to other predators that might come and eat them, like wolves. And so keeping a really tidy den entrance so there's no smells, and also the location of the den up in these really high elevation cirque basins that no other animal really travels into in winter because it's just, the snow is too deep and it's not worth the effort. So this is part of their strategy for predator avoidance. So this slide shows a reproductive den. This is a photo from a drone, and you're looking down at the toe of an avalanche path, and you can see the debris. And then the drone, or the den is actually just where the slope angle flattens out a little bit. And these sort of frowny curves in the snow, those are big boulders with snow pillows on top of them. And so I've highlighted the tracks in blue, and they're basically going in and out underneath this big boulder that provides sort of the structure for the snow tunnels that make up their dens. So the snow tunnels are for insulation, but they'll often be at the base of a big boulder or even a pile of deadfall, and that provides more of a physical structure to the den. And the timing. As I mentioned before, mid-February to mid-May is when females will be in their dens nursing their kits. After that period, the kits are weaned and they're more mobile. They sort of have temporary dens called rendezvous sites. But they're a lot more mobile and a lot less sensitive to disturbance. And this is also, as Doris mentioned, this is the time when we're seeking out the same north-facing slopes for skiing and riding. So if you see a concentration of tracks, we're just asking if you could please stay away and just leave the area and find another drainage to ski in. But before you do, take a couple photos, one close up with your glove maybe for scale and one farther away for patterns, and submit it to wolverinewatch.org. And we'll come in with a drone. And the great thing about having a drone is you don't actually have to be close. We can fly the drone from 1 kilometer away, and the drone takes photos from 100 meters above the ground. And we can take photos and determine if it's a reproductive den of a wolverine. This is what the Wolverine Watch website looks like. We'd like to know where you were and what you saw. We love to hear what you find. And citizen science from skiers and sledders and helicopter pilots has been really critical for us in locating wolverine dens. And we also hope that we can use this information, sightings of wolverine tracks, sightings of wolverine, track concentrations, and wolverine holes, all of them we love to hear about. We're also hoping to use this information to try and identify areas of connectivity for wolverines and good places to put in wildlife crossing structures. And we've also found that we're getting sightings of wolverines in places that they're thought to be extirpated or locally extinct, places like Vancouver Island and Labrador. So that's pretty exciting. So just to sum up, if you see a concentration of wolverine tracks between mid-February to mid-May, please find a different drainage to ski or ride in. and let the mommy Wolverine, let her raise her babies in peace. The basins that they use are really small basins in thousands of kilometers of great terrain. So it's not like we're asking anybody to shut down the backcountry. We're just hoping that people leave mommy Wolverines in peace so that we can have Wolverines on the landscape. Because if it only takes, they're known to move their den, even if someone on skis shows up, they'll abandon their den and they'll try and find somewhere else. So we want to have it so that they have a place to go to raise their kits. This is a slide with our funders and partners. It takes a huge effort to do Wolverine research. It takes a huge amount of effort. And I'd really like to thank Y2Y for making this talk possible. And you guys for listening. Thanks.
We're going to shift a little bit now to another quite amazing species that is in the temperate rainforest here in British Columbia, mountain caribou. And we have Aaron Reid with us, and Aaron was born and raised in the West Kootenay. He studied at Selkirk College in the Recreation, Fish and Wildlife program, and then he completed his degree in wildlife management at the University of Northern British Columbia. And Aaron has spent many years as a student biologist in the Columbia Basin with the Fish and Wildlife Compensation Program. He began working for the province of BC as a wildlife biologist in 2008. And he has worked and researched sheep, goats, cougars, bears, horned animals, canines, and fur bearers. And Aaron started with the Caribou program as the Kootenay biologist in 2017. So welcome, Aaron.
Thank you, Nadine. Can everyone hear me okay? Give me a few nods. Yeah, all right, good, good. All right, I'm just gonna move to share my screen here. This is the one I want. Okay, let's see if we can get this this going here. I'm sorry, the toolbar is in the way. There we go. All right, so yes, mountain caribou. I'm assuming there's a lot of prior knowledge in this group, but I will go over a little bit about just the basic Caribou 101, so we all know what we're talking about. And then status and threats is I'll touch on briefly because that's really why we're here to talk about them. And then of course we'll focus on the winter months, right? And some of the disturbance that we humans can put upon caribou in their peaceful winter environment. So my goal here is to get through this presentation in under 20 minutes. It'll be the first time. And if I could get to my next slide, there we go. All right, so we're talking about all caribou in BC are woodland caribou, but the ones that we're talking about here are in the purple on this map in the south. So they're mountain caribou. They're federally designated as threatened, and they are on a Species at Risk Act, which makes them gives them a whole host of tools that we can use to help recover them. And provincially, they're red listed. So this is a picture. This map shows the inland rainforest, which we all recreate in the winter months. And the red is where caribou habitat is. So at one point in time, they were all the way from the Okanagan Highlands right to the Rocky Mountains, and as far south right into central Idaho, Montana. So the range has shrunk considerably over the past century. But they still inhabit many areas in this map. The pictures here are of caribou, a bull and a calf, and one picture of their very large feet. So these large hoofs are really what allow mountain caribou to be mountain caribou, and their behavior makes them a group of their own, and they utilize that high elevation habitat in winter. So they stand right on top of the deep snowpack, and they eat tree lichen all winter long. So all the other ungulates are in the valley bottoms, except for goats. And caribou are different in that they're way up high and essentially alone all winter long. Now, there's a lot of threats for caribou, and they depend on, each herd has a different set of threats depending on where they are in the province. But the three main factors that have kind of put caribou on that threatened list is humans have changed the landscape so dramatically over the past 100 years that with that, by removing the forest through forestry and power lines and agriculture and everything that we do, we've created a suitable habitat for other ungulates like deer, elk, and moose. And now those densities of those animals are much higher. And the predators that are associated with them are much higher as well. And so there's more encounters with mountain caribou than there ever was. And so there's been a lot of predation mortality in the last few decades, which is one of the main reasons for driving those populations down. Ultimately, though, it's our actions on that habitat and the loss and fragmentation of those old forests. Winter disturbance is also a key factor, and in this equation of what's brought caribou into such trouble, and we'll touch on that a little bit here. These slides were just the story that we sort of helped to illustrate the problems. In the Kootenays, we have two herds left in the central Selkirk area around the Cusp and Duncan, and up in the Revelstoke, north of Revelstoke complex. There's several herds there, and then this map here, the red areas are extirpated now, meaning they don't occur any longer, or they're functionally extirpated, meaning there's maybe one or two animals wandering around, but they're not viable. So I have to show a graph of population trends because it really speaks to why we're concerned. In the top right is north of Revelstoke, and this is one of our herds that's doing fairly well, and because of some pretty major management interventions over the past 15 years or so. So we still have 150, 160 animals in that area, we think, and it is growing. So there is good news in the caribou world. There's still a lot of work to be done in that area, but a lot of good work has been done. And then the graph on the bottom left is the central Selkirks and then the Cusp area, and it sort of shows a trend of decline through the late 90s and early 2000s, and then a steady decline ever since. Now we have as low as 26 animals left. So it's a very serious number. We can't really get any lower than that and still have options to recover. So caribou in winter are, like we mentioned before, are up high elevation. So, you know, in the exact areas that we like to ski, where we find that nice snow all winter long, they are eating exclusively tree lichen. Tree lichen is not that good, though. It doesn't have a lot of protein. So crude protein is what biologists say. We measure what the value of a food source is. So 3% is really low, but it does keep them alive, but they're always on a negative energy budget. So they're never making gains. They're always losing body condition throughout the winter. We can do all sorts of fancy stuff with our collar, our GPS collars that we use these days. And one of the things that we try and understand is, well, what are caribou doing in the winter? And this is a movement analysis. So on caribou in the Cusp area in the central Selkirks, and that fancy graph there is really all it's saying is they don't move that much. So if you look at a 24-hour period, say from 12 o'clock noon on one day to 12 o'clock noon on the next day, most of the movement throughout the winter is less than 500 meters. So they don't move much because they can't afford to. These cows are pregnant. They're trying to grow a fetus and have a calf in the spring that's heavy. So the better condition the cow's in, the heavier calf they can give birth to, and the higher chance of survival of that calf is. So they can't move much, and that's the take-home message. They can't afford to. This is a picture of caribou sign. So many people have probably came across this, maybe ski touring or snowmobiling, or if you've ever taken a flight in the winter with a helicopter over these areas, this is the kind of sign you would see from caribou. They're walking really high in the snow. They have very large tracks. They can't be just mistaken for anything else because there's really nothing else there. And we have fresh beds in this picture, and then we also have old caribou signs, so that the divots in the snow, they had this area to themselves for thousands of years. Wolverines were here, porcupines, the odd marten, rabbits, but truly quiet, a perfect environment just to spend your winter. Things changed though when we discovered it, what an amazing place this is to recreate as well. So heli skiing and ski touring started in the, I don't even know when ski touring became a thing, but it's been several decades. And from our observations, from surveys, it's getting busier and busier. So here's a group of caribou with ski tracks. They're sitting right on top of ski tracks. It's a beautiful shot. This is a very common sight that we see during our surveys. There's a group of caribou in the middle of the screen here. And as you can see, snowmobiles can cover a lot of ground. And in the late 90s, early 2000s, the mountain machine became available as a recreational toy, and it took off, and it is incredible how popular it is. So why is it a problem for caribou? So not just caribou, but many wildlife species can incur this exact these types of disturbance responses. So the one that that everyone can recognize, oh, I hear a baby, is the behavioral response. So it's the one that it's the most obvious to people, right? So you roll over a ridge in a snowmobile, and a group of caribou stand up and they run over that ridge and they move. So that's it. They're increasing their movement rate. They are on edge, and they're likely have a reduced foraging and resting, increased energy expenditures, avoidance or displacement of that area that they want to be in, right? It's a behavioral response. So that's one of the big ones. But the one that I really like to try and describe to people is that physiological response. So it's the stress hormone response. We all have it. Many people refer to it as fight or flight. It serves a purpose. It allows us to immediately mobilize energy reserves to get out of there, to get away from a predator or whatnot. It has a purpose. And those hormones will stay in the body of a caribou for hours to days afterwards. It takes before those hormone levels come back. Now that's okay. But what happens is if it becomes chronic, so if it happens over and over and over again throughout a winter, that's when we see problems with the individual fitness. So the individual will fare poor at the end of the winter if this happens to them over and over again. There's a long list on this of problems from that, but the big one for me is the reproductive output. So caribou they get pregnant into the 90th percentile. They usually calve, but those calves usually don't make it through the first month. And it's likely because, one of the reasons is that their calves are born light, and they just don't have the strength to get away from predators or travel and follow the cow or their mother through the woods in those first few weeks. So, that it's hard to, our presence there definitely has an influence on caribou. Human presence, even on skis, a quiet ski tour through the woods can be perceived as stress event, and likely they're thinking it's possibly a predation event, right? Something moving slowly through the woods can be quite startling to a caribou. I think this was mentioned in the Wolverine talk that backcountry, especially touring, can be unpredictable, and therefore potentially amplify that response, right? So, sledding and helicopters and things, they have an impact, but also touring as well. We have tools such as the Wildlife Act, where we can in government, we can close vast areas to motorized vehicles. And we do, and this is a map of some closures across that caribou range. And you can see some in the south of Nelson, and then a fairly large new one in the cusp area. Typically, those are fixed closures where it affects a ski tour or a group of recreational sledders. Typically, they're fixed in one place, and that's the way they stay. We are experimenting with a new one in the cusp area that actually uses the collar data from the caribou to change as the winter progresses. So as the caribou move, those closure areas move with them, and allows a little bit more opportunity for sledders, but in the context of this closure, adequately protects where those caribou are. Snowmobileselkirks.ca is an interesting, it's a website you can go to find out more about that particular closure. Why we're here is because we all use this area, so we want to know, what can we do really to help the cause of caribou. And I think that just understanding the issue is so complex. Mountain caribou, they touch everyone, whether you're a forestry worker or a heli ski guide or a cat ski. If you're a tail guide, or it's just or just a recreational user, they touch everyone's lives through the restrictions and things that follow them, right? So understanding the issue and how complex it is and how incredibly challenging it is to conserve these animals on a vast landscape, but yet not impact our activities too harshly is a real balancing act. So understanding the issue, so when you're talking to people that at least you know what you're talking about is very helpful. So become informed. And then, in many cases, I like to say lead by example and make good choices while you're out there. If you do come across caribou sign, because there's so few of them, it is important to leave them alone. We recommend the same as you would a wolverine den. Just if you can, if you're just on a day outing, perhaps change your day's plans and go somewhere else. And if it's in an area south of Nelson, we'd like to know about that because they were recently extirpated. So talk to your peers and share your knowledge. And the more people know and understand, the easier it is for them to make those right decisions. There's a poster here on the bottom right that you may see that's been produced by Y2Y and others, and it has some helpful tips as well. And that is it for my chat.